Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Bekah Jo, aka the Makeup Tax Lady. Today on my channel, I wanted to share with you 5 looks and my thoughts on the Sydney Grace collaboration palette with the late Mel Thompson called Tiny Marvels. Look at that gorgeous artwork. And here is the color story. We have lots of fun colors in here to choose from. So this palette is not new to the industry and it's not new to me. I've had it for at least a year now, maybe 2 years, but Sydney Grace likes to do an annual Christmas in July sale, which is coming up for this year. And whether you are considering picking up this palette in that sale or any of their other palettes or other products that they have to sell, or maybe you have this palette in your collection and you've forgotten about it, I really just wanted to bring some inspiration to the table. I know for myself, while I have lots of beautiful things in my collection, including the Tiny Marvels palette, I can't wear them all at once, so it's easy to have something kind of sit to the side. And so I wanted to give this palette new life. I spent the week, I have 5 looks, playing with this palette, and I loved the different looks that I got out of it. As I was getting towards the end of those 5 days, I realized I could totally do so many more looks with this palette. I wouldn't have to limit it to 5. Because there is so much versatility in this palette. I will have timestamps below if maybe you have this palette and you really don't want to talk any introduction and overview to the palette, you just want to get into the 5 looks. I'll have those timestamps linked down below. I also have a non-affiliate link in the description to Sydney Grace's website where they show this palette, so you can read more about ingredients, you can read more about Mel Thompson and where she brought this palette from. Sydney Grace is still sharing a portion of the proceeds from this palette with Mel's family, which I think is absolutely sweet of Sydney Grace and of Mel's original intention with this palette. So again, feel free to check out those timestamps if you're just here for the look inspo. And I really don't intend for this to be any sort of long video. I really want to just share some of my thoughts and share some looks with you to, again, whether you have this palette, whether you're considering picking it up, or maybe you have another palette in your collection that you're like, you know, I really should pull that out and use that again. Do it. Let's play with the beautiful makeup that we already own. I think upon first impression, taking a look at this palette, for many of us who have historically been neutral lovers, there's a lot of color in here, and so it may seem intimidating, but getting to know this palette again this last week has been so refreshing because there is color in this palette, but you can also make it neutral. Also, when I originally got into Sydney Grace, got into eyeshadow, I thought that, you know, these more neutral shades were a little more yellow than what I was typically reaching for, but I've come to love and appreciate even this tone of neutral. So if we look at the palette here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 pressed pigment shades. I believe this is considered a shimmer shade, the shade Web here, and we have 9 matte shades. These shades, Mantis, Flutterby, and Jewel Bee, are definitely towards the pastel colorful. Sydney Grace's formula is absolutely beautiful for working with these shades. They're very soft when you apply, they blend out beautifully. And then we've got our more traditional neutral shades here, here, and here, and then these 2 purpley mauvey type of shades also. I think you can put so many different color combinations, whether you're working just with the mattes, whether you are working with some of these more beautiful pressed pigment shades. I think you can go in so many different directions with these shades and you'll get a beautiful product every time. A couple of my favorite shades in the palette would be Firebutts, this gorgeous pressed pigment, and Scarab, which is this gorgeous pressed pigment. Scarab is, I believe, the only shade in the palette that there's actually a single for. Let's just do a quick live swatch. So again, we've got Firebutts and Scarab. And those are so pretty. Red Chameleon, I think, is what the single shade is for Scarab. But just look at the shine and the reflect on those shades. You can see just based on the colors in there that you can do so many different things with these. Sydney Grace's pressed pigment formula is also beautiful if you do like a one and done and not use any mattes, but just put the pressed pigment on the lid and then use kind of a fluffy brush to blend out where you put the edges of that shimmer down. Most of the times that I used the pressed pigment in these 5 looks, I used a more light hand with them. I wasn't going for full-on opacity like we've got here. I wanted a little bit more sheared out, not truly sparkly, but kind of more, I guess, sparse and dispersed kind of a look. So that's more so what I was going for. You'll see that when you get to the looks. That, of course, is one of the things that I love about Sydney Grace, about their pressed pigment shades, is just how versatile those shades can be. I have said versatile enough, but I just want to get the point across that you really can make the color story and the different formulas in here, making them work for you in whatever way that looks like. I'm gonna do also a live swatch real quick of the shade Web. So this is the one that I called out as probably a shimmer shade, but I don't know, it might pass as a pressed pigment. I don't know how it's technically labeled, but this is a beautiful inner corner shade. You'll see that in a couple of the looks, I put it in the inner corner and then just drug it through the inner portion of my lid just to add a little shimmer, a little reflection, a little something something to the matte shades that I was already wearing in that look. It's my understanding that Sydney Grace is changing the layout of all of their future palettes, including the Enduring Love palette, in that Tiny Marvels will be the only palette going forward that has square pans. I think that's such a cool way to make the Tiny Marvels palette stand out just that much more, and keeping it unique, keeping it fresh. I think this is a palette that transcends trends. I think it goes with every season of the year. Currently we're in summer, but you can see where you'd get some beautiful spring options, some beautiful fall options, winter, whatever season. I think you can very much use this palette to make it to be what you're looking for. You can, and I believe I have been able to pop out all of the individual pans in here and that they're magnetic. I kind of had to not totally destroy the palette, but a little bit, beat it up a little bit just so that I could get the shades out and label them and that sort of thing. I don't know that I ever really plan to take them out of this palette. I like to make BYOPs, so I wanted to have the option, but I love everything in here and the way that it is laid out. Okay, I think that is all the thoughts that I have for now. I'm gonna go ahead and send you into looking at these 5 looks. Again, there will be timestamped down below. If you have any questions or comments, either while you're looking at the looks or about the palette or Sydney Grace Christmas and July sale, whatever it may be, please feel free to drop a comment down below. Please like the video if you liked the video. I'd love it if you'd subscribe. I love to talk about Sydney Grace around here. I have a Sydney Grace playlist. I'll leave that linked down below. And go have some fun. Thank you once again for joining me for today's 5 looks using Sydney Grace collaboration palette with Mel Thompson, the Tiny Marvels palette. I'm so glad that I have this in my collection. I'm so glad that I pulled it out and got refamiliarized with it over the last week. I would again encourage you to do the same, whether you have this palette or you have another palette that you once treasured so dearly. I know that this is one that many of us will not soon forget. So thank you once again for joining me for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.